Another week, another classes video, and this time it's on a very interesting class, the thrower class. It's a class with probably the most simplest of definitions, and even I can't argue with that. However, what I can do is something else, add a second class to each of these guys. Of course, I'll be talking about much more, like the overarching problems the existence of this class creates, and whether this class deserves to exist or not. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to keep up with my videos. Second, join our Discord server. We have some fun stuff to do there, like our very own 1v1 rank called Gauntlet. Finally, consider becoming a channel member if you're interested in supporting out the channel and have ample disposable income for some cool perks, like watching videos early or getting to decide on future video ideas. When it comes to the thrower class, the definition should be quite simple and have zero nuances. According to BrawlStars, throwers are brawlers who can throw projectiles over obstacles, and are good against brawlers who are using cover, as well as being countered by tanks and assassins. I would like to add on to this by saying that throwers are usually brawlers with the lowest amount of self-sufficiency in the game, being very weak, or at least they should be, at short ranges. They're also weak against brawlers with fast movement speed, but strong against brawlers with slower movement speeds. And this goes without saying, but they of course rely on tons of walls existing. Furthermore, and this is a point of contention, why are brawlers like Willow, Siggy, and Berry not throwers? According to Brawl's definition, they technically should be. Well, there's one big reason. They can't throw their supers over walls. Every brawler in the thrower class can do that, and all three of these brawlers can't, so it's pretty obvious this has to be the reason. Of course, the definition of throwing projectiles over walls can be complicated if we make it complicated. The whole Penny situation comes to mind here, as she used to be an artillery, despite not being able to attack over walls. This was probably because she could throw her super over walls, and her super could attack over walls. Even still, she definitely didn't fit, and her removal from the artillery class, in addition to the controller class, was much needed. Now let's start going over the brawlers in the thrower class, and add some classes to them. First, let's start out with Barley. I've mentioned this a bit in my controller video, but I believe Barley is basically the epitome of what it means to be a controller. His lingering attacks work wonders for controlling areas, restricting enemy movement, forcing enemies to either soak up damage that can add up heavily over time, or pushes them back, which is quite impressive for a thrower. Furthermore, when it comes to large-scale area control, his super and hypercharge come to mind. They can make a huge area impossible to go through, which is especially important for Hot Zone, which is, coincidentally, the average controller's best mode. As a bonus, he has a bit of support in him with his healing gadget. Next up is Dynamite. This is another pretty easy one. Dynamite would fit quite perfectly into the damage dealer class with his insane damage potential. First off, hitting both sticks of his Dynamite deals a very solid 3200 damage, which is by far the highest of any of the throwers. Then of course is his super, which deals an insane 6000 damage with his Demolition star power. But even more important is the ability to chain supers, as chaining your super gives you half of your next super. So, if you're good with Dynamite, you can easily hit some team wipes. And of course, there's his Hypercharge, which deals even more damage, but also gives extra dynamite around the hypercharged blast radius. So, even if you miss it, you're basically guaranteed to hit at least one of those. And, just like the super, the amount of super recharge it gives is insane, and allows for nice chaining. Now, Tick, and he's a little more interesting. Obviously, he's most likely to be classified as a controller. His main attack covers a lot of area with the 3 separate projectiles, and they have a similar lingering effect to Barley, though they only stay as long as no one gets hit by them. His hypercharge also can be solid for controlling, but his main attack is the main reason he could be classified as a controller. Of course, he's pretty controversial in Hot Zone, and being good in Hot Zone is basically a must for controllers. However, he does have a bit of damage shielding to him, with his super dealing pretty crazy damage, and of course his hypercharge as well. Overall though, I would still have to lean to controlling as his best, simply due to how much pressure he can generate on enemies with his mines. Next up is Grom, and this gets complicated. There's an argument for him to be made being a controller, with the solid AoE his attacks provide, and of course, the amount of control he has over shifting enemy movement. Overall, however, his controlling abilities are still lackluster and are very short-term oriented. The only other class you can make an argument for is the damage dealer class, and even then, his damage is way too inconsistent, and his damage potential isn't as crazy as someone like Dyna, for example. You could even throw him into the marksman class, considering his crazy range and how he's used mainly on sniper maps, but this is a very, very long reach. Overall, I would have to say he doesn't fit neatly into any class, so he's more of a hybrid to me. Now let's talk about Larry and Laurie. This is yet another complicated case. He's definitely not a controller, but is he a damage dealer? His damage is solid, but not enough to justify him being considered a damage dealer, especially with the nerfs he's received over the months, especially to Laurie. Maybe you could consider him a bit of a tank with Laurie body blocking and his protocol protect star power, but that's flimsy as well. Maybe a bit of an assassin considering his fallback gadget and throwing down Laurie on someone low. Well, that's also quite flimsy. Overall, he's another hybrid with his best class probably being damage dealer. Next up is Sprout, and I would have to go controller for it. The ability to make walls is definitely a controlling ability. It allows Sprout to wall off certain areas from the enemy, forcing enemies to take different routes, similar to something like Squeak's gadget. Other than that, there's no nuance with Sprout. It doesn't fit even remotely into any other class, so controller it is, with no room for hybrid. Finally, last but least, if there was a class for pure hatred and annoyingness, she would be in it. Jokes aside, she's an interesting case. She's not really a controller, unless you consider her ability to slow enough for a controlling classification. Her damage isn't really enough to be considered a damage dealer. Honestly, she, funnily enough, might have the best argument for a tank classification, considering just how tanky Grisgris is. But that raises an entirely new point of contention with brawlers with spawnimals being considered tanks. Case in point, Nita and Bruce. That's a conversation for another day, and for Juju, I think we can safely say she's yet another hybrid. Now that we've gone over the entire class, let's start talking about the class as a whole. First of all, should the class exist in the first place? This is actually a pretty valid question when looking at the classes in Brawl Stars. 5 of the 7 classes in Brawl Stars are about fulfilling a specific role in the game. Tanks, assassins, controllers, damage dealers, and supports. They have little in common other than their ability to fulfill that specific role, such as tanks having high health, or supports being able to buff and heal their teammates. However, when you look at the marksman class, and the point of this video, the thrower class, these two classes are not based on the role they fulfill, but on their type of attack. This provides an actually pretty big divide between brawlers of the first 5 classes and brawlers of the thrower and marksman class. Often you'll see much more blended playstyles in brawlers of the first 5 classes, such as tanks playing like assassins and controllers playing like damage dealers, and overall there's a lot more similarity in the playstyles of brawlers in these 5 classes. However, in these 2 classes, they, other than a few exceptions, don't fit into a single other category neatly, showing a big divide between these 2 classes and the rest of them. Is this a big problem? Not necessarily. However, it does make these 2 classes stand out from the rest of the pack, and therefore harder to properly 1. Balance, and 2. Make unique from each other, which is why these 2 classes are the smallest classes in the game. Anyway, there's another big topic we have to cover when it comes to throwers, and it all has to do with the aggro meta. See, since the release of the hypercharges, and the release of tons of assassins and whatnot, there has been a not so subtle shift to an increasingly aggressive and fast-paced meta. Of course, this is extremely bad for throwers, whose biggest counter are fast-paced aggro brawlers. Because of this, Brawl Stars came up with a risky plan when dropping new throwers. Make them generalists. The entire point of a thrower is that you couldn't use them everywhere, and they were unplayable against certain brawlers. With the new aggro meta, however, there became a shift in this mindset. first dropped Larry, who immediately power creeped the entire thrower class even after he got nerfed to oblivion. The concept of a thrower having a spawnable turned the thrower class upside down, allowing Larry to be much more of a safe, generalist pick than the rest of the class, with a more balanced matchup spreadsheet than the rest of his class. Then of course the second tower fell with the release of Juju. Here came an even more powerful brawler than post-nerf Larry, bringing yet another spawnable to the thrower class, and even more versatility and generalization. Suddenly, the rest of the throwers looked tame in comparison to these two, and simply couldn't compete in the new aggro meta. Brawlstars had succeeded in their risky play, but at the cost of sidelining the rest of the thrower class to mediocrity besides these two. And of course, it isn't easy to balance the rest of the class like I said earlier. A broken thrower class is genuinely the most annoying thing to face off against, which we have seen multiple times. Even when they're not broken, they're still rage-inducing, like facing off against Tick especially, even in the present day. Overall, the thrower class is in a weird spot. It's very separated from every other class in the game, but with recent developments in the meta as a whole, it's clear that it can no longer be practicing isolationism, and we've seen this with both Juju and Larry being released as much more generalist brawlers in the thrower class. This unfortunately has the side effect of causing the rest of the thrower class to be power creeped. However, as I just said, the thrower class as a whole is insanely difficult to properly balance. So in conclusion, the thrower class is completely cooked. As always, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist I made just for classes videos, or join the Discord server.